The house felt strangely vast. For 5 years, every corner had been filled with the sounds of Mom's battle with Alzheimer's, the hum of the oxygen machine, the chime of the pill reminder, and her own voice, growing more distant each day. Now, the only sounds were the creak of the floorboards under my feet and the low, steady hum of the old refrigerator. The smell of lilies from the funeral bouquets had begun to turn cloying, mingling with the scent of casseroles the neighbors had brought by. It was the smell of small-town grief. I stood in the kitchen, my shoulders heavy not just from lack of sleep, but from the weight of a freedom I didn't know what to do with. I'd been a nurse. I'd had 12-hour shifts, medical jargon, and the structured chaos of a hospital. I gave it all up when Mom got worse. Now, my hands automatically wiped down an already clean coffee mug, a muscle memory honed from thousands of pills sorted and injections prepared. The sound of an expensive rental car pulling into the driveway shattered the quiet. Ethan, my brother, blew in like a small storm from Chicago, bringing the city air with him. His perfectly tailored suit, polished leather shoes, and the sharp, sandalwood scent of his cologne were entirely out of place in our time-worn home. "Clara," he said, his voice booming while he was still on his phone, holding up a hand to make me wait. "Look, just leverage the assets against the Q4 projections. It's a no-brainer." He ended the call and turned to me, placing his alligator leather briefcase on the dining table Mom used for sorting seeds. His smile was professional, the same one he probably used on his wealthy clients. "You look exhausted," he said, loosening his tie. "You shouldn't have to worry about the paperwork. That's what I'm here for." That was Ethan's line. Always. "I'll handle it." On the surface, it was a caring brother. But underneath, I always heard the subtext: "You're not capable of handling this. Leave it to the expert." "It's fine," I replied, staring out the window, where the last of the autumn leaves clung to the branches. "It's just quiet now." Ethan didn't understand that kind of quiet. To him, silence was a vacuum to be filled with calls, deals, and plans. He walked around the living room, his sharp gaze that of a financial consultant assessing a property. "This wall needs a new coat of paint," he remarked, "and we should replace this couch. It looks so dated." He didn't say, "our house." He said, "this wall, this couch," as if he were surveying real estate, not the home that held our childhood. Mom had always been so proud of Ethan, her golden boy, who'd escaped this small town for the big city, making more money than anyone in our family could fathom. The checks he sent home each month to help with medical costs were proof of his success. She bragged about him to everyone, from the cashier at the grocery store to our neighbor, Mrs. Carroll. Right on cue, the doorbell rang. It was Mrs. Carroll, holding a warm plate of brownies. "Oh, Clara, sweetie," she said, her voice dripping with sympathy. "You look so pale. And Ethan, it's a blessing the family has you. Your mother was so proud." She turned to me, her voice dropping. She was always talking about her brilliant son, the one who knew how to make money grow on trees. Ethan offered a practiced, humble smile. "I just tried to do what was best for Mom." After Mrs. Carroll left, Ethan's phone rang again. This time, the voice on the other end was serious. I only caught a few words: "Lawyer. The will, as soon as possible." Ethan listened, nodding, his face set in a serious expression. When he hung up, he turned to me and placed a hand on my shoulder, a gesture that was meant to be comforting but felt like control. "That was Mr. Thompson, the lawyer. He wants us in his off." 2 days later, Ethan flew back to Chicago with a promise to sort everything out remotely. The house fell quiet again. But this time, the silence didn't feel peaceful. It felt heavy, like an unanswered question. To keep my mind from wandering, I decided to start the hardest job: cleaning out Mom's room. Her room still held her scent, a gentle mix of lavender from the sachets in her drawers and the old paper of her favorite books. Everything was in its proper place. The collection of tiny porcelain owls on the windowsill, the hand-knitted Afghan draped over her armchair, and the worn-out Bible on her bedside table. This was her sanctuary, a place built from frugality and small joys. I started with the closet, packing the floral dresses she saved for special occasions into donation boxes. Deep in the back, tucked behind her Sunday best shoes, was an old shoebox. I assumed it held old letters or photos from her girlhood. My mother was a sentimental person. But when I lifted the lid, there were no soft handwritten letters or black and white photos. Instead, there was a neatly folded stack of papers. The one on top had a line of stark red ink. Final notice before collection. My heart skipped a beat. It was from a company called Praxis Financial Recovery. I'd never heard of it. I dug deeper. There were letters from Apex Collection Group, Midland Credit Management. The names sounded cold and corporate. These weren't bills from the Cleveland Clinic or Ohio Health. They were credit card delinquency notices. American Express, Chase Sapphire, Capital One. The combined debt totaled over $80,000. A cold dread spread through my spine, defying the warmth from the heater. This has to be a mistake, I told myself. My mother was the kind of woman who paid with cash at the grocery store and would drive 5 extra miles to save 10 cents on a gallon of gas. She didn't even own a computer. How could she have this much credit card debt? I sat down hard on the floor, surrounded by my mother's clothes, my head spinning. Ethan handled all the finances. He always said, "Let me worry about it. Clara, you just focus on mom." He was always so proud of how he had optimized mom's finances so she could get the best care. Was this what the best care was? A mountain of debt he had hidden away? Just then, a knock came at the door. It was Mrs. Carroll, this time with chicken soup. "I just thought you could use something warm, honey," she said, bustling into the kitchen. "It's getting so cold out there. Feels like winter came early." I forced a smile, hiding the stack of papers behind my back. Mrs. Carroll looked around, her eyes nostalgic. "Oh, I miss your mother. She was always so optimistic. Even when she was getting sicker. She was always talking about her plans for the future." "Plans for the future?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Oh, of course," Mrs. Carroll said enthusiastically. She was so thrilled about Ethan's big tech investment. Said she was getting in on the ground floor. A seed investor, I think she called it. She said it was going to pay for the best care in the world. "And still leave a fortune for you too." Mrs. Carroll's words were a lightning strike in the quiet room. A seed investor? My mother barely knew how to use email. Where would she get money to invest? And if she had investment money, why were these collection agencies sending threatening letters to her house? The soup Mrs. Carroll brought was still hot. But in my chest, everything had gone cold. The careful picture Ethan had painted, of a dutiful son shouldering every financial burden, now had a crack in it. A very big one. After Mrs. Carroll left, I spread the collection notices out on my mother's knitted afghan. The numbers danced in front of my eyes. The legal threats, the unfamiliar company logos, the false peace of the last few days was shattered. I was no longer a grieving daughter. I was a daughter searching for answers. And I had a feeling those answers were buried deep beneath my brother's carefully polished lies. The next morning's sunrise brought no comfort. It only cast a harsh light on the collection notices spread across my kitchen table. The world outside went on, the familiar rumble of the garbage truck, the bark of a neighbor's dog, but my own world had been permanently altered. The initial, hot rage had cooled, leaving behind a sharp, terrifying clarity. My nurse's instincts were taking over. When faced with a crisis, the first step is to gather the data. Diagnose before you act. I wasn't going to call Ethan. Not yet. Confronting him now, without a fortress of facts, would be like screaming into a hurricane. He'd deny, manipulate, and somehow twist the narrative until I was the grieving, paranoid sister. No, I needed the truth, organized and undeniable. My starting point was an old folder labeled health insurance that I found in Mom's desk drawer. Inside were years of explanation of benefits forms. Most were for small, routine doctor's visits, but as I got to the last 2 years, the numbers began to leap off the page. I saw the name of a provider I'd never heard of, Evergreen Home Solutions. I poured a cup of strong, black coffee, sat down at the kitchen table that had become my reluctant command center, and dialed the insurance company's 1-800 number. After 10 minutes of looping hold music and an automated voice assuring me that, "Your call is important to us," I was finally connected to an agent. "Hello, my name is Clara Evans," I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I'm calling on behalf of my mother, Margaret Evans. I'm reviewing some of her paperwork and had a question about claims made by Evergreen Home Solutions. The woman on the other end clacked away at her keyboard. Yes, Ms. Evans. I see regular claims from Evergreen. They were providing specialized in-home care for Mrs. Evans. Specialized? I repeated. Can you be more specific? I was my mother's primary caregiver. And I don't recall this service. Certainly. Let me see. I'm showing captain codes for intensive physical therapy, mobility therapy, and 24/7 medical monitoring. The blood in my veins turned to ice. My mother had late-stage Alzheimer's. She was bedridden for the last 18 months. She was incapable of physical therapy. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Well, ma'am, all the claims were submitted with the provider's signature and that of the patient's authorized financial guardian. The financial guardian? Yes, a Mr. Ethan Evans. I thanked her and hung up, my hand trembling. Over $400,000 had been paid out to a phantom company for services that were never rendered. Ethan hadn't just stolen money. He had turned our mother's tragedy into a fraudulent enterprise. The next step was the credit card statements. Ethan had been so proud of setting Mom up with paperless billing, claiming it was more secure and better for the environment. In reality, it was just better for covering his tracks. I sat at Mom's old desktop computer, trying to log into her bank account. What was the password? I tried her birthday, our street name. Nothing worked. And then I remembered. Sparky, the name of the terrier we had as kids. I typed in, Sparky 1998. The floodgates opened. It was worse than I could have imagined. The credit card statements were a map of Ethan's double life, funded by his dying mother. Line by line, the betrayal unfolded. $4,200 at Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse in Chicago. A client dinner. I presumed. $8,500 for a watch from Shinola, a trendy designer brand, certainly not for timing Mom's medication. $12 for Chicago Cubs season tickets. Seats right behind the dugout. Monthly charges for a high-end apartment in Lincoln Park, an expensive neighborhood. The audacity of it was breathtaking. My mother had patched old sweaters and reused tea bags, while Ethan was living a life of luxury in her name. I opened a spreadsheet, a habit from my days as a nurse manager. I made columns: date, amount, description of charge, and corresponding insurance claim. A sickening pattern began to form. Every few weeks, right after a major expenditure by Ethan in Chicago, a massive, fraudulent claim from Evergreen Home Solutions would be filed in Ohio. He was using the insurance payouts to cover the credit card debt. He had built a cruel, efficient money machine out of our mother's illness. I didn't sleep that night, surrounded by numbers and lies. I sat under the dim kitchen light, a cold fury having replaced my grief. I now knew the what and the how. I saw the full scale of the betrayal. Now, I just needed to understand why. And more importantly, I needed a plan. The will reading on Friday was no longer a formality. It was going to be a trial. And I was going to be the one to deliver the verdict. The spreadsheet was my anchor in a sea of chaos. For 2 days, I barely left the kitchen table, cross-referencing credit card statements with insurance claims, my handwriting filling a yellow legal pad with dates, amounts, and damning connections. The initial shock had subsided, replaced by a low, simmering rage. It was the quiet, methodical anger of a caregiver who had watched her mother fade away with dignity, only to discover that dignity was being sold off piece by piece to fund a life of luxury in Chicago. On Wednesday afternoon, an email with the subject line, regarding the estate of Margaret Evans, arrived from Thompson and Associates. The official notice. The will reading was confirmed for Friday at 10 a.m. My stomach twisted. The deadline was set. An hour later, my phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a picture of Ethan and me as kids, smiling on a tire swing. A picture from a lifetime ago. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath to steady my voice, and answered. Clara. Ethan's voice was a smooth, somber baritone. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Ethan, I said, my eyes fixed on a highlighted $8,500 charge for a Shinola watch on the papers in front of me. Good, he sighed, a performance of profound exhaustion. Listen, the reason I'm calling. I spoke with Mr. Thompson's office. Now that we have a date set, there's something we need to talk about. I wanted you to hear it from me first, before we're sitting in that stuffy office. I remained silent, letting him lay the track for his train of lies. This is going to be difficult to hear, he continued, his voice dropping into a tone of gentle pity. I've been trying to shield you from this. But Mom's medical debts are staggering. Truly astronomical. My knuckles turned white as I gripped the phone. I traced the outline of my spreadsheet with a pen. I've been managing the bills for years, trying to negotiate with the providers. But the cost of long-term care. Clara, it's a broken system. The out-of-pocket expenses for non-covered services just piled up. I did everything I could. He paused, waiting for my reaction. I gave him nothing. I see, I said, my voice flat. His confidence seemed to falter for a fraction of a second before he recovered. The truth is, he said, his voice now a near whisper, there isn't much left. In fact, we're deep in the red. The estate is insolvent. I'm so sorry. I could hear the fake emotion cracking in his voice. He was a master actor. What does that mean for the house? I asked, my own voice betraying no emotion at all. This was the moment his whole story was building towards. That's the hardest part, he said, and I could almost picture him shaking his head in sorrow. We'll have to sell it. It's the only major asset left. It might not even be enough to cover everything. We might still owe. He let the sentence hang in the air. The trap was now fully set. In his mind, he had just delivered the tragic, unavoidable news. He was the responsible brother, forced to be the bearer of bad tidings created by a cruel healthcare system. He was framing the narrative, ensuring that when the lawyer announced the estate was empty, everyone's grief and anger would be directed at the system, not at him. I was meant to be the naive, emotional sister, too devastated by the news to question the details. You were so wonderful with her day to day, Clara, he added, a final, condescending pat on the head. You handled the things that mattered. But the financial side of a disease like this, it's brutal. I didn't want to overwhelm you with it. You didn't overwhelm me. You underestimated me, I thought. Okay, Ethan, I said softly, thank you for telling me. My quiet acceptance seemed to unnerve him more than tears would have. That's it? You're okay? I'm just tired, I lied. I'll see you on Friday. I hung up before he could say another word. My heart was pounding, not with fear, but with adrenaline. He had just confirmed his entire strategy. A minute later, my phone pinged with a new email notification. It was from Ethan. Subject: our conversation. Clara, just wanted to summarize our difficult call. As we discussed, I've confirmed with the attorneys that Mom's extensive medical debts have unfortunately rendered the estate insolvent. This means we will have to proceed with the sale of the house to satisfy the creditors. I know this is devastating news. We'll get through it together. Love, Ethan. It was a corporate CYA. Cover your ass, disguised as a loving note. Proof that he had informed me. I clicked print. The printer in the corner whirred to life, spitting out another page for my collection. I took the warm sheet of paper and placed it neatly on top of the pile. Exhibit D. The premeditated warning. Ethan had laid his trap, believing I was the prey. He had no idea I was the one watching from the shadows, collecting the evidence, and waiting for him to walk into mine. The printed email sat on top of my evidence pile, a monument to Ethan's arrogance. His trap was perfectly constructed, built on a foundation of shared cultural fear. Who wouldn't believe a story of financial ruin at the hands of the American healthcare system? It was plausible, tragic, and, for his purposes, the perfect cover. I had a mountain of circumstantial evidence, a clear pattern of theft and deception. But I knew it wasn't enough. A skilled lawyer could argue it was mismanagement, poor judgment under stress, a series of desperate mistakes made by a son trying to keep his mother's finances afloat while also managing his own. They could paint him as incompetent, but not necessarily as a criminal. I was missing the final, crucial piece. Intent. I needed something that showed, in his own words, that this wasn't chaos, it was a calculated design. My eyes scanned the quiet living room, landing on the old Dell laptop sitting on a corner desk, coated in a thin film of dust. Mom's computer, Ethan had bought it for her years ago, setting it up so she could receive photos of his important life in Chicago. She'd barely used it, preferring her worn photo albums. But Ethan, in his haste to seem like the perfect son, had synced his own email account to it, so he could troubleshoot it for her remotely. I doubted he ever remembered to log out. The machine whirred and groaned as it booted up, the old Windows logo a ghost from a different era. The fan kicked in, sounding like a tiny, struggling engine. It took a full 5 minutes to connect to the Wi-Fi. I clicked open the ancient email client. Her inbox was a predictable landscape of pharmacy newsletters and junk mail. My heart sank. Nothing. Then, a thought, an instinct. I navigated the cursor to the Sent Items folder. I scrolled, my finger tracing circles on the dusty touchpad. I went back weeks, then months, past emails he'd sent to family members with photos attached. And then I saw it. An email sent nearly a year ago. From his account. To a Mark Jessup. The subject line made my breath catch in my throat. Bridge funding. My hand trembled as I clicked it open. The email was short, but it was the Rosetta Stone to his entire deception. Mark. Market headwinds are hitting the startup harder than projected. The Series A funding is looking shaky. And I need to get liquid to bridge us through the next 2 quarters. I won't be able to draw from my main portfolio without raising red flags. I've initiated a more creative solution. I'm restructuring some legacy family assets. It's a medically linked trust fund. Very complex, very illiquid. He was talking about mom's health insurance. I've managed to leverage it as seed capital. It should be enough to keep us afloat until the market turns. It's a temporary measure, but it's the only way to protect our valuation. Let's connect next week to discuss the new runway. Don't worry, the capital is secure. It's an old school source. Totally off the grid. No one will ever question it. Best. Ethan. I read it 3 times. The words burning themselves into my memory. Leveraging legacy assets. Seed capital. Old school source. Totally off the grid. He wasn't just a son who had made mistakes. He was a predator who saw his own mother not as a person, but as an illiquid asset, to be plundered. He wasn't stealing to survive. He was stealing to protect the valuation of his failing company. To protect his fragile ego. This was the smoking gun. My movements became sharp and precise. I found a blank USB drive in a junk drawer. I logged into my own email and forwarded his message to a new, encrypted ProtonMail account I created on the spot. I downloaded the email as a file and saved it to the USB drive. For good measure, I took out my phone and photographed the screen, capturing the damning text, the date, the sender and recipient, all in one clear shot. I shut down the old laptop, the screen going dark with a soft click. The room fell silent again. But this time, it was a different kind of quiet. The questions were gone. The doubt was gone. I held the small, plastic USB drive in the palm of my hand. It felt impossibly heavy, like the weight of every lie, every stolen dollar, every moment of feigned affection. Ethan's trap was built on a story. A sad, believable story, but I now held the truth. The shock and anger that had been simmering for days had finally crystallized into something diamond-hard. I was ready for Friday. The drive to the lawyer's office was a blur of gray Ohio skies and bare November trees. I clutched the worn strap of my mother's handbag, the small USB drive feeling like a lead weight inside it. The fake leather was cool against my tense knuckles. I had spent the last 36 hours in a state of suspended animation, going through the motions of eating and sleeping while my mind rehearsed, planned, and waited. The offices of Thompson and Associates were exactly as I'd pictured, mahogany walls, shelves of leather-bound legal books that looked like they'd never been opened, and the faint, cloying scent of lemon polish. It was a room designed to feel solid and important, a stage for life-altering decisions. Ethan was already there, standing by the large window overlooking the town square. He was wearing a dark, funereal suit, his shoulders slumped in a perfect imitation of sorrow. He turned as I entered, his face a mask of weary compassion. "Clara, I'm glad you're here," he said, giving my arm a squeeze. It was the gesture of a man taking charge. Our aunt and uncle, Susan and David, arrived moments later. Aunt Susan, my mother's younger sister, was a bundle of nervous energy, her purse clicking open and shut. Uncle David was a quiet man who looked perpetually disappointed in the world. They offered me sad smiles and pitying looks before turning their attention to Ethan. "Ethan, it's good you're here to handle all this," Aunt Susan said, her voice a hushed whisper. "Clara has been through so much. She shouldn't have to deal with these details." I was already being painted as the fragile one, the one to be protected. Ethan's narrative was taking root before a single legal document had been touched. We were led into a conference room where Mr. Thompson, a man in his late 60s with tired eyes, waited for us. He nodded gravely as we took our seats around the long, polished table. Ethan sat at the head, opposite the lawyer, naturally assuming the position of power. I sat to the side, my mother's handbag resting heavily in my lap. "Thank you all for coming on such a difficult occasion," Mr. Thompson began, his voice dry as old paper. He unfolded a document with a soft crinkle. "I will now read the last will and testament of Margaret Evans." The legal language was dense, but Mom's wishes were simple and clear. Her small collection of jewelry was left to me. Her 15-year-old Buick went to our cousin. A modest donation was to be made to the local animal shelter. It was the will of a woman who had lived a simple life and cared for small things. I felt a lump form in my throat, a genuine pang of grief that cut through the anger. Finally, Mr. Thompson said, adjusting his glasses, "We come to the primary asset of the estate, the property located at 452 Oak Street." "If I may," Ethan interrupted, holding up a hand as if the words were causing him physical pain. He rose slowly from his chair. Every eye in the room turned to him. This was his moment. The performance was about to begin. Before Mr. Thompson continues with the formalities, Ethan began, his voice thick with emotion. "I feel it's my duty, as the one who managed Mom's finances, to prepare you all for what's coming. To give you some context." He walked to the window, his back to us, creating a dramatic silhouette against the gray light. "For the past 5 years," he said, his voice cracking perfectly, "I fought a battle alongside Mom, not just against her illness, but against a healthcare system that is designed to drain you of everything you have. We threw everything we had at it, the best care, experimental treatments, anything to give her a little more time, a little more comfort." He turned back to face us, and I could see a single, perfect tear tracing a path down his cheek. I shielded Clara from the worst of it. Her job was to be with Mom, to provide the love and care that no amount of money could buy. My job was to fight the bills, to keep the wolves from the door. Aunt Susan was already dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Uncle David stared at his hands, his expression grim. "I wish I could stand here and tell you that my efforts were enough," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a near whisper of defeat. "But the costs were biblical. The debts are overwhelming. There's nothing left. In fact, the estate is deeply in debt." A collective gasp went through the room. "So when Mr. Thompson reads the part about the house," Ethan concluded, looking directly at me now, his eyes swimming with fake pity, "I need you all to understand that it's just a piece of paper. The reality is, we have to sell it. It's the only way to even begin to satisfy the creditors. I am so sorry." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Then, Aunt Susan's sharp voice cut through it. "Clara," she said, her tone a mix of shock and accusation. "Honey, how could this happen? You were here every day. How could you not know things were this bad?" I felt the blood drain from my face. It was happening, exactly as he had planned. The weight of the room, the shock, the disappointment, it was all collapsing onto me. "It's not her fault, Susan," Ethan said, waving a magnanimous hand. "She's not a numbers person. I told her not to worry, that I would handle it. But to lose the house." Uncle David finally spoke, shaking his head slowly. "Your mother loved that house. To have it all disappear, it's a disgrace." The word hung in the air, disgrace. And though it wasn't spoken directly to me, every eye in the room made sure I felt it. I was the one who had been there. I was the one who had let it happen. I was publicly humiliated, framed as the naive, incompetent daughter who had fiddled while her family's legacy burned. Ethan looked at me, a flicker of pure triumph in his eyes before it was masked again by sorrow. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, shuffling his papers uncomfortably. The trap had sprung. I was caught, isolated, and judged by my own family. I sat perfectly still, my hands folded over the handbag in my lap, my face an unreadable mask, and let the full force of their judgment wash over me. I let them believe I was broken. The silence in the room was a physical weight. Aunt Susan's disappointment, Uncle David's shame, Mr. Thompson's professional discomfort, it all pressed down on me. Ethan stood by the window. The very picture of tragic responsibility. He had won. This was the scene he had directed in his mind 100 times. I let the silence stretch for one moment longer, letting him savor his victory. Then, I calmly placed my mother's handbag on the polished mahogany table. The soft thud it made was the only sound. "You're right about one thing, Ethan," I said, my voice quiet but carrying clearly across the room. Every head turned towards me. "The estate is in debt. A massive amount of debt." Ethan's posture stiffened slightly. This was not in his script. "But it has nothing to do with Mom's medical care," I continued, unlatching the handbag. "And it has nothing to do with a broken healthcare system." I reached inside and pulled out the first stack of papers. The aggressive red ink of the final notice, stamps stark against the white. I slid them across the table towards Mr. Thompson. "These are collection notices," I said, "not from hospitals, from credit card companies, for cards opened in our mother's name over the last 3 years. She had over $87,000 in high-interest consumer debt when she died." "Clara, this is absurd," Ethan started, taking a step forward. "You're confused. Mom must have. Mom used cash at the grocery store and cut coupons out of the Sunday paper." I cut him off, my voice still even. I pulled out the next file, the printed credit card statements. I pushed them towards Aunt Susan. "I don't think Mom was the one who spent $4,000 on steak dinners in Chicago, Susan, or $12,000 on Cubs season tickets, or $8,500 on a designer watch." I looked directly at Ethan. Her wrists were too thin for a watch like that. Aunt Susan's hand flew to her mouth as she scanned the pages. Uncle David leaned over her shoulder, his face turning from disappointment to disbelief. "This is a private family matter," Ethan snapped, his voice losing its smooth, mournful quality. "This is not the time or the place. The time for privacy was before you started using our mother's name to fund your lifestyle," I said, my voice gaining an edge of steel. I pulled out the final document I had printed myself, my spreadsheet. And that was just the beginning. The real money wasn't in the credit cards. It was in the insurance. I turned my attention to the lawyer. "Mr. Thompson, I spoke with Mom's insurance provider. They confirmed they paid out over $400,000 in the last 2 years to a home care agency called Evergreen Home Solutions for services like intensive physical therapy and 24/7 medical monitoring." "Exactly," Ethan said, seizing the opportunity. "The costs were enormous. I told you. The problem, Ethan," I said, meeting his gaze, "is that Evergreen Home Solutions doesn't exist. And the bigger problem is that Mom was bedridden. She couldn't have received physical therapy. I know, because I was the one who was here. 24/7, not a phantom nurse. Me." The color was draining from Ethan's face now. He looked at Mr. Thompson, appealing to the only authority figure he thought he had left. "She's grieving. She's clearly overwrought and confused. None of this can be proven." "Actually," I said, reaching back into the handbag. "It can." I pulled out the small, black USB drive. I held it up between my thumb and forefinger. "Mr. Thompson, does this conference room have a screen?" The lawyer, now sitting bolt upright, looked from me to Ethan, then nodded towards a large monitor on the wall. "Yes, of course." The next 5 minutes were a blur of methodical action. I walked to the head of the table, plugged the drive into the port, and with a few clicks, Ethan's email to Mark Jessup filled the screen. Every word magnified for the room to see. "Restructuring some legacy family assets. It's a medically linked trust fund. Leverage it as seed capital. Capital is secure. It's an old school source. Totally off the grid. No one will ever question it." I let the email hang there in the suffocating silence. I didn't need to narrate it. The words spoke for themselves. I heard Aunt Susan let out a soft, choked sob. Uncle David was on his feet, staring at his nephew with an expression of pure contempt. "You," Uncle David whispered, his voice shaking with rage. "You used your dying mother as a bank?" Ethan stood frozen, exposed under the sterile light of the projector. The mask of the grieving son had shattered, revealing the desperate, hollow man beneath. I walked back to my seat, my movements calm and deliberate. "He didn't steal $87,000. I said to the room, my voice clear and final. "He embezzled $1.2 million. From insurance fraud, fraudulent credit lines, and by systematically draining her savings. He is the reason the estate is in debt. He is the reason this house is facing foreclosure. He is not the victim of a broken system. He is the one who broke everything." The room was silent, save for the sound of my aunt weeping. All eyes were now on Ethan, who finally, after a lifetime of confident deception, had absolutely nothing left to say. The truth, stark and ugly, was on the screen for everyone to see. Ethan didn't shout, he didn't rage, he simply crumpled. The confident, sharp-suited man from Chicago vanished, replaced by a hollowed-out shell. He sank into one of the leather chairs, his head in his hands, unable to look at the damning evidence of his own words still glowing on the screen. He was a king dethroned in a sterile conference room. Uncle David took a step towards him, his face a mask of cold fury. "How could you, Ethan? After everything Clara did, after everything your mother went through, how could you?" Ethan didn't answer. He just shook his head, muttering something into his palms that no one could hear. Mr. Thompson cleared his throat, his professional demeanor returning, though his eyes, when they met mine, held a new respect. "Mr. Evans," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument, "given the documents presented here today, I must strongly advise you to seek legal counsel immediately. It is clear that the estate has grounds to press charges for felony fraud and embezzlement." He then turned to me. "Ms. Evans, my firm will represent the estate and begin proceedings at once. We will file injunctions to freeze all his known assets pending investigation." Justice arrived not with a bang, but with the dry, methodical language of the law. There was no dramatic confrontation. Aunt Susan simply helped a weeping Uncle David out of the room. They didn't look back at their nephew. I was the last to leave. As I stood in the doorway, Ethan finally looked up at me, his eyes pleading, searching for the quiet, accommodating sister he thought he knew. He didn't find her. He only found a stranger who looked back at him with a quiet, devastating finality before closing the door. The months that followed were a blur of legal paperwork, depositions, and long calls with fraud departments at credit card companies. It was a tedious, ugly process of entangling the web Ethan had woven. But with every fraudulent debt I cleared from my mother's name, with every asset the court clawed back, I felt the weight on my shoulders lighten. Ethan, faced with irrefutable evidence, pleaded guilty. He lost everything: his job, his fancy apartment, his reputation, and his family. His trap, so carefully designed to secure his future, had instead guaranteed his ruin. Now, spring has come to Ohio. The daffodils my mother planted years ago have pushed their way through the soil along the walkway. I kept the house. It was a long fight, but it's mine now, free and clear. For so long, these walls had been my prison, a place of duty and exhaustion. Now, they are my sanctuary. I sit at the kitchen table, the same table that once served as my command center, covered in a battlefield of spreadsheets and collection notices. This morning, it holds something different: a nursing school catalog and an application for a recertification program. The house is quiet, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's not the heavy silence of grief or the tense silence of suspicion. It's the peaceful silence of possibility. Ethan stole my mother's money, and he stole 5 years of my life. But in his arrogance, he gave me something back: my own strength. He bet that I was the quiet, fragile one who would break. He never imagined that the quietest people are the ones who are listening the closest. And that a caregiver's hands, trained to heal, also know how to methodically and precisely uncover the truth. At its heart, Clara's story is a quiet but powerful testament to a truth many of us learn the hard way. the deepest betrayals often come not from strangers, but from the very people we're taught to trust implicitly. It's a chilling reflection of a uniquely American anxiety, the fear that our elderly loved ones, navigating a maze of complex medical and financial systems, are vulnerable to exploitation, sometimes from within their own family. This story isn't just about fraud, it's about the invisible labor and sacrifice of caregivers, who are often underestimated, dismissed as not a numbers person, or told they are too emotional to understand the real world. The ultimate lesson here is one of profound empowerment that resonates with so many of us who have felt overlooked. It reminds us that true strength isn't about being the loudest person in the room. It's about the quiet resilience forged in the trenches of everyday life. It's the meticulous attention to detail learned from years of care, the patience to unravel a complex knot of lies, and the courage to trust your own intuition when something feels fundamentally wrong. Even when the world is telling you to stay silent, it is a call to be a fierce advocate, not only for those we love, but also for ourselves and our own perception of the truth. So many of us have stories about navigating these difficult family dynamics or feeling like our voices weren't heard. If you feel comfortable, we would be honored if you shared your own experience in the comments below. Your story matters. Take care of yourselves and each other.